The year was 1851, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the auction block in Charleston, South Carolina. The air hung thick with humidity, the scent of sweat and desperation mixing with tobacco and whiskey. It was market day, and wealthy plantation owners had gathered, fanning themselves as they appraised the human merchandise. Solomon stood apart from the other enslaved people on display, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. At 32, he was neither young enough to promise decades of labor nor skilled enough to fetch a premium price. While others stood straight, trying to appear strong to avoid family separation or secure a less brutal master, Solomon seemed almost absent, his mind elsewhere. Next up, a field hand, answers to Solomon, 32 years of age, healthy constitution, the auctioneer announced without enthusiasm, starting bid at $600. The crowd remained silent. The auctioneer frowned. "Come now, gentlemen, strong back, good teeth. 500 then?" A few planters exchanged glances, but no hands raised. Solomon's reputation preceded him, passed between 3 plantations in 5 years. Whispers followed him, too slow to learn commands, too vacant in the eyes, too prone to staring into space when orders were given. 400. He can work tobacco or cotton. From the back of the crowd, a voice called out, "I heard Barnwell couldn't get a day's proper work from him," said the man's touched in the head. Uneasy laughter rippled through the assembly. The auctioneer's face flushed. 300 then, surely worth that much at least. Finally, a single hand raised. Colonel James Everett of the Mockingbird Plantation, known throughout the county for 2 things: his prize-winning thoroughbreds and his brutally efficient plantation overseer, a man called Thaddeus Blackwood. 200, Everett counted, his voice bored, dismissive. The auctioneer hesitated, looked around for competing bids, then slammed his gavel, sold to Colonel Everett for $200. As Solomon was led away, chains rattling around his ankles, he kept his eyes on the ground, his face an unreadable mask. Only once did he lift his gaze, not toward his new owner, but toward the tall, broad-shouldered figure standing beside the colonel. Thaddeus Blackwood stared back, a riding crop tapping rhythmically against his thigh. Their eyes met for just a moment, and something, perhaps a flicker of recognition, perhaps a silent challenge, passed between them. Then Solomon lowered his gaze once more. Mockingbird Plantation sprawled across 2,000 acres of prime Georgia soil, its white-columned main house presiding over endless fields of cotton. As the wagon carrying Solomon rolled through the property, the seasoned enslaved people working the fields barely looked up, their backs bent under the merciless sun. "Take a good look," muttered Elijah, an older man purchased alongside Solomon. "This place has a reputation. They say Blackwood gets more work out of a slave than any other overseer in 3 counties. They also say not everyone survives his methods." Solomon gave no indication that he'd heard, his eyes tracing the layout of the plantation with apparent disinterest. The fields, the slave quarters, the smokehouse, the main house, the stables, all arranged in a precise geometry of power and control. When they reached the slave quarters, a collection of crude wooden cabins arranged in 2 neat rows, they were greeted by an elderly woman who introduced herself as Esther, the cook at the main house. "You'll be assigned your tasks in the morning," she explained, her voice steady but her eyes sympathetic. "Each of you will have a quota to meet. Fall short, and Blackwood will make an example of you." Her gaze lingered on Solomon. "You there. I've heard talk about you already. They say you're simple. That true?" Solomon met her gaze and said nothing. Esther sighed. "Lord help you then. Blackwood has no patience for slowness of any kind." That night, Solomon was assigned a space in a cabin with 5 other men. As they settled onto their straw pallets, introductions were made, but Solomon offered only his name, speaking for the first time since his arrival. "Not much for conversation, are you?" said a young man named Marcus who couldn't have been more than 19. "No point wasting words," Solomon replied, his voice surprisingly clear and articulate for a man with his reputation. "You'd best find your tongue when Blackwood speaks to you," warned another man, Thomas, who bore a lattice of scars across his back. "He don't repeat himself, and hesitation earns the whip." Solomon nodded once, then lay down, turning his face to the wall. Hours later, when deep breathing indicated the others had fallen asleep, Solomon's eyes opened in the darkness. He reached into his mouth and extracted a small object from between his cheek and gum. In the faint moonlight filtering through cracks in the cabin wall, it gleamed dully, a small brass key. Solomon studied it for a moment, then carefully wrapped it in a scrap of cloth and tucked it into a hole in his palate. His face, usually blank when observed, was transformed in this private moment, alert, calculating, intelligent, a face no one at Mockingbird Plantation had yet seen. The next morning arrived with the blaring of a horn before dawn. Solomon shuffled into line with the others, accepting a meager breakfast of cornmeal mush before being assigned to a cotton field under Blackwood's direct supervision. Thaddeus Blackwood cut an imposing figure as he rode along the edge of the field on his chestnut stallion. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and cold blue eyes, he carried himself with the casual authority of a man accustomed to absolute power. A bullwhip hung coiled at his side, and the leather of his boots gleamed with careful maintenance. "I understand we have some new faces today," Blackwood announced. "Let me be clear about my expectations. Each slave will pick a minimum of 80 pounds of cotton daily. Those who meet their quota consistently might earn small privileges. Those who fail—" He let the sentence hang, his hand resting meaningfully on the whip. His eyes found Solomon among the laborers. "I'm particularly interested in you, Solomon. Colonel Everett purchased you at my suggestion despite your reputation. You see, I have a theory about men like you." Solomon kept his eyes lowered, his expression vacant. "I believe that half the simple-minded slaves in the South are merely pretending," Blackwood continued, "playing a role to avoid work, to lower expectations. A clever ruse, perhaps, but not one that will succeed here." A murmur ran through the assembled workers. Blackwood smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Today, I want to see what you're capable of, Solomon. I've assigned Isaac here to work alongside you." He gestured to a muscular man nearby. "Isaac holds the record for cotton picked in a single day at Mockingbird. I expect you to keep pace with him." It was an impossible demand, and everyone present knew it. Isaac's prowess was legendary, 120 pounds on his best day, when even the strongest workers struggled to meet the 80-pound quota. As the laborers dispersed to their assigned rows, Isaac approached Solomon with a look of pity. "He's setting you up to fail," he whispered. "He does this sometimes, creates impossible situations to justify punishment, especially with new arrivals, establishes his control." Solomon nodded vaguely, as if he hadn't fully comprehended. The day unfolded under the blistering Georgia sun. Cotton bolls tore at fingers until they bled, bent backs ached, and throats grew parched. While others worked with grim determination, Solomon's movements appeared awkward, inefficient. He fumbled with the cotton, dropped portions, and took too long between plants. By midday weighing, Isaac had collected 28 pounds. Solomon had managed only 11. Blackwood observed the measurement with a satisfied smirk. "Disappointing, Solomon," he said. "At this rate, you won't make even half your quota. Perhaps you need motivation." The afternoon grew hotter, the work more punishing. When the final horn sounded and the day's pickings were weighed, Isaac had gathered an impressive 93 pounds. Solomon's sack weighed only 37. Blackwood's face showed no surprise, only cold satisfaction. "It seems the rumors about you were true after all," he said. "But I'm a fair man. I'll give you 3 days to improve. If you can't meet your quota by then, you'll face consequences." As the workers trudged back to their quarters, Isaac fell in step beside Solomon. "He's going to make an example of you," Isaac murmured. "That's his way. Breaks the new ones to frighten the rest of us." Solomon said nothing, but his eyes tracked Blackwood as the overseer rode toward the main house, noting the path he took, the people he spoke with, the precise time of his departure. That night, when the cabin was dark and quiet, Solomon retrieved the small brass key from its hiding place. This time, he also pulled out a scrap of paper on which he made marks with a tiny stub of charcoal hidden in the seam of his shirt. The marks formed a crude but detailed map of the plantation, with notes on timing, movements, and patterns. His face in the darkness was focused, intense, the face of a man with a plan. 3 weeks passed at Mockingbird Plantation, and Solomon settled into a pattern that reinforced his reputation. His cotton picking improved marginally, enough to avoid the most severe punishment, but never enough to meet his full quota. Each failure earned him the whip, administered publicly as Blackwood had promised. But he endured the lashes with vacant-eyed stoicism that unnerved even seasoned slaves. "There's something wrong with him," whispered Marcus one evening, as they watched Solomon clean his wounds with water from the communal bucket, his face showing no pain despite the angry welts crisscrossing his back. "It's like he doesn't feel it." "Maybe he doesn't," Thomas replied. "Maybe that's his blessing or his curse." But there was another pattern developing at Mockingbird. Small items began to disappear. A pencil stub from the plantation office, a spool of thread from the seamstress cabin, a small knife from the kitchen. Nothing valuable enough to cause alarm, but puzzling nonetheless. More concerning to Blackwood were the whispers circulating among the slaves, stories that seemed to appear from nowhere about successful escapes from other plantations, about safe houses and sympathetic whites who might help runaways. "Someone's stirring up trouble," Blackwood told Colonel Everett over brandy on the plantation house veranda, "putting ideas in their heads." "Your concern is noted," the colonel replied lazily. "But I trust your ability to maintain order. That's why I pay you more than any other overseer in the county." Blackwood's pride was momentarily soothed, but his unease remained. One evening, as Solomon sat alone outside his cabin, whittling a small piece of wood with the stolen kitchen knife, Esther approached him. "You shouldn't be out here by yourself," she said, glancing nervously toward the main house. "Blackwood sometimes rides through the quarters at night." Solomon looked up, his normally vacant expression momentarily replaced by something sharper, more alert. Seeing her notice the change, he immediately resumed his dull-eyed stare. "But you're not really simple, are you?" Esther whispered, sitting beside him. "I've been watching you. The way you move when you think no one's looking, the way you listen to everything." Solomon's hands stilled on the piece of wood. "I won't tell anyone," she continued, "but I want to know why. Why pretend? It only brings you pain." For a long moment, Solomon remained silent. Then, speaking softly, he said, "The overseer at my first plantation knew I could read, caught me with a newspaper, cut off 2 of my toes to teach me a lesson and ensure I couldn't run. He extended his right foot, where 2 toes were indeed missing. That's when I learned that knowledge is dangerous when visible, so I made myself invisible." Esther's eyes widened. "You can read! Who taught you?" "My first master's daughter. She was 7, I was 6. We learned together until her father found out. She was forbidden from speaking to me again. But by then, I already knew my letters." He resumed whittling, his skilled hands belying the fumbling incompetence he displayed in the fields. "Being thought simple means being underestimated. Being underestimated means being watched less carefully. But the punishments are a small price for what I'm planning." Esther drew back slightly. "What are you planning, Solomon?" Instead of answering, he handed her the piece of wood he'd been carving. It was a small, intricate key. "Not all chains are made of iron, Esther," he said, "and not all keys open locks." The following Sunday, the one day of relative rest allowed to the enslaved at Mockingbird, Blackwood summoned Solomon to the plantation office, a small building near the main house. "Come in, Solomon," Blackwood said when Solomon appeared in the doorway, affecting his usual shuffling gait and downcast eyes. "Close the door behind you." Solomon obeyed, standing motionless before the overseer's desk. Blackwood studied him with narrowed eyes. "Do you know why I called you here?" Solomon shook his head slowly. "I'm puzzled by you," Blackwood said, leaning back in his chair. "In the fields, you're the poorest worker I've ever seen. Clumsy, slow, apparently dull-witted. And yet—" He opened a drawer and removed a small wooden figure, a perfectly carved chess piece. A knight. "I found this in the stables. One of the stable boys said you gave it to him." Solomon's face remained blank. "This," Blackwood continued, holding up the chess piece, "is not the work of a simpleton. The detail, the craftsmanship, it shows intelligence, patience, skill." He set the piece on the desk. "So which is the real Solomon? The fumbling field hand or the skilled artisan?" For a breathless moment, Solomon's mask slipped, and the calculating intelligence behind his eyes became visible. Then the vacant expression returned. "I'd just like to make things, sir," he mumbled, his voice deliberately slurred. Blackwood's hand shot out, gripping Solomon's jaw painfully, forcing his head up. "Don't play games with me, boy. I've broken men far smarter than you." Solomon did not resist the painful grip, but neither did his expression change. "You're planning something," Blackwood hissed. "I can sense it. And whatever it is, it won't succeed. I know every inch of this plantation, every slave, every hiding place, every escape route. I've caught every runaway who's ever tried to flee Mockingbird." He released Solomon's jaw with a shove. "From now on, you'll be watched day and night. One wrong move, and I'll make an example of you that this plantation will remember for generations." Solomon rubbed his jaw, his eyes once again downcast. "Yes, sir," he murmured. "Get out." As Solomon turned to leave, Blackwood added, "And Solomon, the next time I punish you, I won't stop until I see fear in those empty eyes of yours. That's a promise." That night, Solomon convened a secret meeting in the woods beyond the slave quarters. 5 trusted individuals gathered: Esther, Isaac, Thomas, Marcus, and a young woman named Abigail, who worked in the main house as a maid. "Blackwood suspects me," Solomon told them, speaking clearly and articulately, all pretense of slowness gone, "which means our timeline has moved up." "You still haven't told us exactly what you're planning," Thomas said, nervously glancing over his shoulder. "And being out here is dangerous. If the patrol finds us—" "The patrol won't come this way tonight," Solomon said confidently. "The dogs are distracted by meat I left on the east side of the property." He removed the rough map he had been creating and spread it on the ground. By the light of a carefully shielded candle, they could see it was remarkably detailed, showing not just the layout of Mockingbird, but also surrounding properties, roads, and waterways. "For 3 years, I've been planning my escape," Solomon explained. "Moving from plantation to plantation, gathering information, creating a map that extends all the way to the Ohio River. Each place I've worked, I've memorized the terrain, the patrol schedules, the fastest routes north." 3 years, Marcus gasped. "You've been playing simple-minded for 3 years? Longer, since I was 12. 20 years of watching, listening, learning while appearing to understand nothing." Something dark flickered across Solomon's face. "It wasn't always an act. There were times the pain nearly broke my mind for real. But I held on to one thought. Someday I would be free." "And now?" Esther asked. "Now I'm ready, but I need your help." Solomon pointed to various locations on the map. Blackwood believes he knows every possible escape route from Mockingbird. What he doesn't know is that I've discovered a way that no one has tried before. He explained his plan, pointing out the roles each would play. When he finished, silence fell over the group. "It's too dangerous," Thomas finally said. "If we're caught, we'll be killed," Solomon acknowledged bluntly. "Or worse. But I've been watching Blackwood for weeks, learning his patterns, his weaknesses. He's meticulous, yes, brutal, certainly, but he's also arrogant. He believes himself infallible, and that's where we'll defeat him." "Why not just go yourself?" Abigail asked. "Why risk involving all of us?" "Because I'm not just seeking my own freedom," Solomon replied. "I'm going to destroy Blackwood and everything he stands for, and in doing so, create an opportunity for anyone at Mockingbird who wishes to escape." The others exchanged uncertain glances. "This isn't just about running away," Solomon continued, his voice intense with suppressed emotion. "This is about striking a blow against the system itself, about proving that no matter how tightly they chain us, no matter how carefully they watch us, they cannot own our minds or our souls." He looked at each of them in turn. "I don't ask this lightly. Each of you must decide for yourself. But know this, in 3 days I make my move, with or without your help." One by one, they nodded their agreement, fear and determination mingling in their expressions. As they dispersed, Solomon carefully refolded his map. In the fading candlelight, his face was transformed, not vacant, not calculating, but radiant with purpose. The face of a man who had lived a double life for 20 years, patiently crafting a plan of such audacity that even those who had just agreed to help him couldn't fully grasp its scope. On Wednesday morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at Mockingbird. Andrew Caldwell, a wealthy cotton broker from Charleston, had come to negotiate the purchase of Colonel Everett's harvest. His early arrival set the plantation in a flurry of activity. Colonel Everett ordered a lavish dinner prepared for that evening. Blackwood was instructed to ensure the fields and processing areas were immaculate for the tour they would conduct in the afternoon. "I want every slave working at peak efficiency," Blackwood barked at his subordinates. "Any who falter get the whip." The timing couldn't have been more perfect for Solomon's plans. As the overseers dispersed, the first phase of Solomon's strategy unfolded quietly behind the scenes. In the kitchen, Esther added a special mixture of herbs to the stew she was preparing for the overseers' midday meal. Just enough to ensure that by evening, several would be suffering from stomach cramps. In the stables, Isaac subtly adjusted the saddle on Blackwood's favorite mount, loosening it enough that it would shift if the horse were ridden hard. Meanwhile, Marcus made barely perceptible alterations to the cotton gin that would cause it to jam during the afternoon demonstration, and Solomon continued his performance as the plantation simpleton, fumbling with his cotton picking while observing every reaction, every movement, every adjusted patrol route necessitated by the visitor's presence. By midday, the disruptions began to take effect. 2 overseers reported ill and had to be relieved of duty. Blackwood, attempting to make up for the shortfall, rode from field to field until his saddle suddenly slipped, throwing him to the ground in full view of both Colonel Everett and Mr. Caldwell. Though not seriously injured, Blackwood's pride suffered a devastating blow as the colonel berated him for the embarrassing incident. His mood darkened further when the cotton gin malfunctioned during the tour, sending clouds of cotton fibers into the air and causing the distinguished Mr. Caldwell to suffer a coughing fit. "I've never seen so many mishaps in one day," Colonel Everett fumed as they returned to the main house. "Blackwood, I expect better from you." "Yes, sir," Blackwood replied through gritted teeth, flushed with anger and humiliation. "I will get to the bottom of these incidents." As evening approached, Solomon was summoned to the plantation office. He shuffled in, affecting his vacant expression, though internally he was alert to every detail. The tension in Blackwood's shoulders, the barely suppressed rage in his eyes, the way his hand clenched and unclenched around his riding crop. "A strange day at Mockingbird," Blackwood said, his voice dangerously soft. "A day of unfortunate accidents, the kind that makes an overseer wonder if perhaps these weren't accidents at all." Solomon stood silently, eyes downcast. "Look at me, Solomon." Slowly, Solomon raised his gaze. "I had a fascinating conversation with Mr. Caldwell," Blackwood continued. "He mentioned that on one plantation they discovered a slave who had been pretending to be simple-minded for years while secretly organizing resistance. Do you know what they did to him?" Solomon gave no response. "They broke both his hands with a hammer," Blackwood said, a cruel smile at the corners of his mouth. "Ensured he would never again have the dexterity to pick locks or create tools or draw maps." He leaned forward. "I saw you speaking with Esther last night, and with Isaac before. Tell me what you're planning, and perhaps I'll be merciful." Something flickered in Solomon's eyes, not fear but calculating intelligence. Then the vacant look returned. "I don't understand, Master Blackwood," he mumbled, his voice slurred and childlike. "I was just asking Esther for extra food. I'm always hungry after working." Blackwood exploded from his chair, the riding crop whistling through the air to strike Solomon across the face, blood immediately welling from a gash on his cheek. "Don't lie to me," Blackwood shouted. "I know you're not what you pretend to be." Solomon touched the blood on his face, momentarily shocked. He had underestimated Blackwood's perception. Blackwood advanced on him again, the riding crop raised. "I will beat the truth out of you." Before he could strike again, a knock came at the door. "What is it?" Blackwood snapped. The door opened to reveal Abigail. "Colonel Everett requests your presence at the main house immediately. Mr. Caldwell has questions about the cotton processing." Blackwood hesitated, torn between his desire to continue the interrogation and his obligation to the colonel. Finally, he lowered the riding crop. "This isn't finished," he told Solomon. "When I return, you will tell me everything, or what happens next will make today's little cut seem like a kindness." After Blackwood stalked out, Abigail quickly moved to Solomon's side. "Are you all right?" she whispered. "It's nothing," Solomon replied, all pretense gone. "But he suspects too much. We need to accelerate the plan." "Tonight?" Solomon nodded. "Tonight. Tell the others. Everything must be ready by midnight." Abigail hesitated. "Solomon, he'll kill you if he catches you." "He'll try," Solomon replied, a strange, fierce light in his eyes. "But his arrogance is his weakness. He believes he knows everything about this plantation, every hiding place." A grim smile touched his lips. "He doesn't." As darkness fell, the dinner at the main house proceeded with strained cordiality. Colonel Everett worked to charm Mr. Caldwell despite the day's mishaps, while Blackwood sat in brooding silence. In the slave quarters, preparations continued with quiet urgency. Thomas collected bundles of supplies that had been gradually accumulated over weeks. Marcus and Isaac created diversions, a small fire in an outbuilding far from the escape route, an apparent fight that would draw the attention of the night patrol. Solomon himself moved with ghostly precision, placing small, carved wooden markers at key points to guide those who would follow. Each marker was shaped like a mockingbird, a bitter mockery of the plantation's name. By 11 o'clock, the plantation had settled into its nighttime routine. The patrol made its rounds, the overseers retired to their quarters, and Blackwood returned to his cabin with a bottle of whiskey in hand. At precisely midnight, Solomon emerged from his cabin, no longer shuffling, but moving with confident, silent grace. He made his way not toward the periphery of the plantation, but toward the heart of Mockingbird, toward Blackwood's cabin. As he approached, He could see light still burning in the windows. Blackwood was awake, perhaps reviewing plantation accounts, perhaps planning what torments to inflict on Solomon when next they met. With practiced stealth, Solomon circled the cabin. At the rear window, he paused, listening. The scratch of a pen, the occasional clink of a glass against wood. Blackwood was at his desk, writing. Solomon withdrew the brass key he had kept hidden for weeks, but he didn't approach the door. Instead, he placed the key carefully on the window ledge, positioned so that when the morning light struck it, it would gleam unmissably. A message, a challenge. Then, from another pocket, he produced a small, folded paper. With infinite care, he wedged it beneath the key. His task completed, Solomon melted back into the darkness, heading now toward the cotton gin, the last place anyone would look for an escaping slave. Inside the gin house, Esther, Thomas, Abigail, and 3 others waited with tense anticipation. When Solomon appeared, they didn't speak, but watched him with eyes that held equal measures of fear and hope. "Is everything prepared?" Solomon asked softly. Thomas nodded. "The distractions are in place." "But Solomon, are you sure? It seems impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Solomon replied. "Only unlikely." He moved to the far corner of the gin house, to a section of wooden flooring that appeared no different from any other. Yet when he pressed in a particular spot, a small trap-door revealed itself, an access panel for maintenance that had been forgotten. Beneath it lay not solid ground, but a narrow tunnel. "During the last expansion of the plantation," Solomon explained in a whisper, "they built the new gin house over an old drainage system. The tunnel runs for nearly half a mile, emerging in the creek bed beyond the south cotton field. From there we follow the creek eastward until we reach the river. A boat will be waiting." "A boat?" Marcus whispered incredulously. "How did you arrange a boat?" Solomon's eyes gleamed. "There are more allies in this world than Blackwood knows, more people willing to risk everything for freedom. The Underground Railroad has branches he's never suspected." One by one, they disappeared into the tunnel, Solomon helping the elderly Esther negotiate the narrow opening. He himself went last, pulling the trapdoor closed above him and securing it with a wooden peg that would break if anyone tried to force it open from above, leaving no evidence of their passage. As they crawled through the darkness, Solomon's mind was not on the immediate escape, but on what would happen when dawn broke, when Thaddeus Blackwood would find the key and the note on his window ledge. The note contained just 5 words, written in a hand far too educated for a supposedly illiterate slave. "Catch me if you can." Dawn broke over Mockingbird Plantation with deceptive serenity. Nothing in the tranquil tableau suggested the storm about to erupt. Thaddeus Blackwood awoke with a pounding headache, the aftermath of too much whiskey consumed in solitary rage the night before. As he rose and moved to splash water on his face, a flash of sunlight caught his eye. There, on the outer ledge of his window, lay a small brass key, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper. For a long moment, Blackwood stared at the objects, uncomprehending. Then, with growing dread, he threw open the window and snatched them up. The key was unfamiliar. The note, when unfolded, contained 5 simple words that landed like blows. "Catch me if you can." The handwriting was educated, refined, certainly not that of a barely literate field hand, yet Blackwood knew immediately who had left it. "Solomon!" he hissed through clenched teeth. Within minutes, Blackwood had raised the alarm. Overseers were roused, the patrol gathered, and dogs were brought from their kennels, straining at their leashes. A quick check of the slave quarters confirmed Blackwood's suspicions. Solomon was gone. So were Esther, Thomas, Abigail, Marcus, Isaac, and 2 others. 7 slaves, vanished from under the nose of an overseer who had boasted he had never lost a single runaway. Colonel Everett arrived at the commotion, his face darkening with each new detail of the escape. 7 of them? He thundered. And you have no idea how they got past the patrols. They must have had help, Blackwood insisted, unwilling to admit he had been outmaneuvered. Perhaps from that cotton broker, Caldwell. Nonsense, the colonel snapped. Caldwell is a respected businessman with plantations of his own. Why would he help our slaves escape? He jabbed a finger into Blackwood's chest. This is your responsibility. Find them. Make an example of Solomon that no slave in Georgia will ever forget. Blackwood nodded grimly. I intend to, sir. The search began with methodical precision. The dogs were given the scent from clothing left in the cabins. The patrol fanned out along the plantation boundaries, focusing initially on the northern edge, where the forest offered the most obvious cover, but by mid-morning, the search had yielded nothing. The dogs seemed confused, circling the slave quarters, but unable to pick up a trail leading outward. It's as if they vanished into thin air, one of the patrollers reported. Blackwood stared at the note in his hand, reading those 5 mocking words again. They didn't vanish, he said slowly. They're taunting us, challenging us. His fingers clenched, crumpling the paper. He's challenging me. A new thought struck him. Check the cotton gin, he ordered suddenly, and the processing sheds. Check every building in the central compound. The patrol exchanged confused glances. The central compound? Why would escaping slaves hide there? Because, Blackwood replied, that's the last place we'd look, and Solomon, the real Solomon, is clever enough to know it. The search shifted to the plantation's core facilities. At the cotton gin, the patrol found nothing immediately suspicious. But when Blackwood himself inspected the building, his eyes were drawn to a section of flooring in the corner. There, he said, pointing. Check that section. When the boards were pulled up, they revealed the forgotten access tunnel, and at its mouth the broken peg that Solomon had rigged to snap if discovered. Blackwood's face contorted with rage and reluctant admiration. The drainage tunnels, I didn't even know they were still functional. Without hesitation, he prepared to enter the tunnel himself, ignoring protests that it could be a trap. Bring the dogs, he ordered. We have their trail now. Miles away, Solomon's group emerged from the dense forest onto the banks of the Savannah River. They had been traveling for nearly 12 hours, following the escape route that Solomon had planned with such care. They were exhausted, their clothes torn, their feet blistered, but alive and undetected. There, Solomon said, pointing to a bend where a small rowboat was hidden among the reeds. Our transportation north. Esther sank to the ground, trembling with fatigue. I can't go further. Leave me. Save yourselves. No one gets left behind, Solomon said firmly. We started together. We finish together. As Isaac and Marcus prepared the boat, Solomon studied the forest behind them, his expression troubled. What is it? Thomas asked, noticing his scrutiny. We haven't been pursued, Solomon replied. Not a single patrol, not a single dog. Isn't that good? It's unexpected. Blackwood is too proud, too obsessed with his perfect record. He should have been on our trail by now. Maybe he took the wrong direction, Abigail suggested hopefully. Solomon shook his head. Or maybe he figured out our route, the tunnel, the creek, the river. He looked downstream. There's another way he might pursue us. As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of barking dogs reached them, faint but unmistakable. They've found the tunnel, Solomon said calmly. Everyone into the boat. Now. They worked quickly, helping each other into the small craft, but as the others settled themselves, Solomon remained on the shore. Aren't you coming? Marcus asked, alarmed. Solomon shook his head. Not yet. Blackwood will have men watching the river. If we all go together, we'll be too easy to spot. He handed Isaac his map. Follow the river north for 3 miles, then take the eastern fork. Land at the stone marker shaped like a cross. Walk east until you reach a farmhouse with a red door. Tell them Solomon sent you. They'll guide you to the next safe house." "But what about you?" Abigail asked, tears in her eyes. "I'll lead them away from your trail," Solomon replied, "then find my own way north. This was always part of the plan. I need to end this, not just escape, but ensure Blackwood never hunts another human being again." "That's suicide!" Thomas protested. "No," Solomon said with quiet confidence. "It's justice." He pushed the boat into the current. "Go now. Don't stop for anything." They called out to him as the river carried them away. Solomon watched until the boat disappeared around a bend, then turned to face the forest, from which the sound of dogs grew steadily louder. For the first time, he allowed himself a genuine smile, not the vacant expression of his slave persona, nor the calculating look of his planning, but a smile of pure, fierce joy. "Come then, Blackwood," he whispered. "Let us finish this game." The Thaddeus Blackwood emerged from the forest at the riverbank just as the sun began to set. The dogs strained at their leashes, having followed the scent trail from the tunnel exit all the way to this spot. "They took to the water here," Blackwood said, studying the disturbed mud, "heading north." "Shall we continue the pursuit upriver?" asked one of the patrollers. Blackwood scanned the riverbank carefully. "No," he said slowly, "not all of them went by boat." He pointed to a single set of footprints leading away from the riverbank. "One stayed behind. Solomon." "How can you be sure it's him?" "Because he's the only one clever enough to know that a boat on the river is too easily spotted," Blackwood replied, "and because he wants me to follow him. This is personal between us now." He turned to the patrol. "Jenkins, take 2 men and continue upriver. Find the boat and those slaves. The rest of you, return to the plantation. Tell Colonel Everett I'm pursuing Solomon personally." "Alone, sir?" one of the men questioned. "These woods aren't safe after dark." "I'm counting on that," Blackwood said, checking his pistol. "Now go." "Eh, sirs." As the patrol dispersed, Blackwood set off alone on Solomon's trail. The dogs he sent with Jenkins, knowing that in this final hunt it was his intelligence against Solomon's that would determine the outcome. After an hour of tracking, Blackwood realized the trail had changed direction. Solomon was no longer heading east, but doubling back toward the river in a wide arc. The reason became clear when Blackwood pushed through a thicket and found himself on the edge of a steep ravine. At the bottom, a swift-flowing creek tumbled over rocks toward the savannah. "Clever," Blackwood muttered. "Follow the creek back to the river, where you can rejoin your friends upstream." He began to pick his way down the ravine slope. Halfway down, a voice spoke from the darkness, startling him badly. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't find me, Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood raised his lantern, the light illuminating Solomon standing beside the creek, no longer stooped or shuffling, but straight-backed and dignified. In his hand was a walking stick carved with intricate patterns. "Solomon," Blackwood acknowledged, "or should I call you by your real name? I doubt Solomon is what your mother called you." "Solomon is who I am now," came the calm reply. "The man I was before you and your kind tried to break me. He's gone, but not forgotten." Blackwood reached the bottom, setting his lantern on a rock. "I admit you played your role well. The vacant eyes, the shuffling gait, a masterful performance. You had me fooled for a while." "Not long enough," Solomon acknowledged. "I underestimated your perception. And now here we are." Blackwood gestured to the forest. "What was your plan, Solomon? To kill me? To eliminate the legendary slave catcher who never lost a runaway?" Solomon smiled slightly. "If I wanted to kill you, you would already be dead. No, Mr. Blackwood, I wanted something more valuable than your death. And what might that be?" "A witness," Solomon replied enigmatically. "Someone to carry the story back to Mockingbird, to every plantation owner and overseer in Georgia." Blackwood laughed harshly. A witness to what? Your capture. That's what's about to happen. Did you think I came alone because I feared you? I came alone because I don't need help to bring one slave back to face justice. Justice, Solomon repeated, an interesting concept from a man who has spent his life denying it to others. He stepped forward into the lantern light. But you're right. One of us will be captured tonight. With a fluid motion, Blackwood drew his pistol and aimed it at Solomon's chest. On your knees, hands behind your head. Solomon remained standing, unconcerned by the weapon. Before this goes further, there's something you should know. He gestured to the creek. This water flows to the savannah, as you've guessed. But what you don't know is that 2 miles downstream, it passes through land belonging to the Wilcox family. Blackwood frowned. The Wilcoxes. What do they have to do with this? Everything, Solomon replied. 20 years ago, a young house slave on the Wilcox plantation was caught teaching himself to read. The punishment was 20 lashes. But the overseer, a particularly sadistic man named Thaddeus Blackwood, newly employed, decided 20 lashes weren't enough. He added 20 more, and when the slave still refused to beg for mercy, he cut off 2 of his toes. Blackwood's face drained of color. You, the Wilcox boy, but you were sold south, to Louisiana. That was the story, Solomon agreed. In truth, I was left for dead. A field hand found me, nursed me back to health. When I could walk again, I began my journey, not north to freedom, but through slave country, learning its ways, planning for the day I would return. Return for what? Revenge? Justice, Solomon corrected. For every man, woman, and child you've tormented over the years. Blackwood's finger tightened on the trigger. Pretty speech, but it changes nothing. You're still a runaway, and I'm still the man who's going to take you back to Mockingbird in chains. Am I? Solomon asked quietly. Mr. Wilcox, is that your assessment? From the shadows behind Blackwood, a new voice spoke. Not at all, Solomon. Blackwood spun around, pistol now pointing into the darkness. A man stepped into the lantern light, white-haired, distinguished, dressed like a wealthy planter, but carrying a shotgun trained steadily on Blackwood. Jonathan Wilcox, the man introduced himself. Former owner of Magnolia Plantation, current conductor on the Underground Railroad. Blackwood stared in disbelief. Wilcox, but you're a slave owner who saw the evil of his ways, Wilcox suggested. Yes, 20 years ago, when my favorite houseboy was nearly beaten to death on my property, I began to question everything. When he disappeared, presumed dead by your hand, the questioning became a crisis of conscience. And when my daughter, who had shared her reading lessons with that slave boy, died of grief, my transformation was complete. He gestured with the shotgun. Drop your weapon. After a moment, Blackwood let the pistol fall. Solomon and I have been corresponding for years, Wilcox continued. When he told me he had located you at Mockingbird and planned to end your career as a slave catcher, I insisted on being present. Why? Blackwood asked hoarsely. What do you intend to do with me? That, said Solomon, is the beautiful part of justice. We intend to set you free. Blackwood's expression contorted. What? Not physical freedom, Solomon clarified. Your body will be imprisoned for years, I expect. Mr. Wilcox has friends in law enforcement in the North, friends very interested in a man who has violated the Fugitive Slave Act. That's absurd, Blackwood sputtered. The Fugitive Slave Act protects slave owners, not when those slaves are already legally free, Wilcox interrupted. Solomon has been a free man for 12 years. His papers signed by me and registered in Pennsylvania. Every time you punished him at Mockingbird, you were assaulting a free citizen. A crime in any state. The blood drained from Blackwood's face. No one will believe this. Actually, Solomon said, withdrawing a folded document, it's your own records against you. This is a copy of the punishment log you kept. Noted here, in your hand, are 17 separate occasions when you ordered me whipped, each one a criminal assault on a free man. Where did you get that? Blackwood whispered, his arrogance crumbling. From your office, Solomon replied, during those times when you thought I was too simple-minded to be left unsupervised. I've been collecting evidence against you for months. Evidence that will be presented at your trial in Pennsylvania, where Mr. Wilcox will personally escort you tonight. As they led Blackwood away, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. Solomon paused, lifting his face to the golden rays. For the first time in 20 years, he stood fully upright, his gaze clear and direct, his shoulders unburdened by the weight of his long deception. In that moment, witnessed only by the rising sun and the two men beside him, Solomon embodied the promise that would soon engulf the nation. That all men, created equal, would one day breathe the air of freedom. The slow-witted slave no one wanted had not only bested the most respected overseer in Georgia, he had struck a blow for justice that would reverberate far beyond Mockingbird Plantation, and in doing so, he had reclaimed not just his freedom, but the true power of his mind, his voice, and his humanity. As they moved forward into the new day, Solomon began to softly sing a spiritual that had sustained generations of the enslaved with its coded promise of deliverance. Follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd. The words hung in the dawn air like a prayer, a promise, and a proclamation.